Welcome back to Hidden Faith. It's good to have you here. Every time you return, it tells me you're someone who wants more than the familiar version of history. You're here because you want to know what else was happening beneath the official story, the part that rarely makes it into textbooks or tradition. Today, we're stepping into a moment where a single discovery forced scholars to rethink how early Christianity actually looked. Not the polished version we grew up hearing, but a landscape full of competing ideas, rival teachers, and communities with very different views of salvation. The story begins with a set of texts that stayed hidden for more than 1,000 years. And when they finally reached the hands of researchers, they revealed a side of the Christian world that almost disappeared. So settle in. Let's open this chapter together and look at the writings someone worked very hard to remove from history. Picture a clay jar sealed for centuries, buried under the Egyptian sun, a jar no one touched, no one opened, no one even knew existed. Inside it sat pages that carried a different understanding of Jesus, salvation, and the purpose of human life, a version of the story that almost didn't survive. When the jar finally broke open in the 1940s, the words inside didn't just surprise researchers. They disrupted the idea that early Christianity was unified or singular. These writings suggested that salvation wasn't simply about belief, but about awakening something already inside you. And they described a universe far stranger than the one taught in churches. A world shaped by hidden powers, a flawed creator, and a path to freedom that depended on inner knowledge. So here's the question that sets everything in motion. If these texts carried a message so different and so challenging, why were they buried? And who decided the world shouldn't read them? Most people grow up thinking early Christianity was a single, unified movement. One message, one community, and one shared understanding of who Jesus was. The four Gospels in the New Testament feel complete. They feel final, as if no other interpretations ever competed for space or influence. That picture is simple, familiar, and easy to carry, but history rarely works that neatly. In reality, the first centuries after Jesus were full of debate. Dozens of groups tried to explain his teachings in their own way. Some focused on faith, others on rules, others on mystical experiences, and none of them agreed on every point. What we know today as Orthodox Christianity didn't exist yet. It was still forming, still choosing what counted as correct belief, and still sorting through ideas that would one day be labeled heresy. But outside that developing framework, other communities had their own writings, texts that offered different answers to the biggest questions of the time. Who is God? What is the soul? Why do we suffer? And what did Jesus actually teach? These communities didn't lose because their ideas were weaker. They lost because the group that became the institutional church gained structure, power, and the ability to decide which writing stayed and which disappeared. So when the Nag Hammadi texts resurfaced in the 20th century, they didn't create confusion. They revealed how much of the early story had gone missing. The story of the Gnostic Gospels doesn't begin in a library or a museum. It begins with a group of farmers digging for fertilizer near the cliffs of Nag Hammadi, Egypt in 1945. They weren't looking for history. They weren't searching for ancient secrets. They just needed soil, but their tools struck a large clay jar sealed with pitch. At first, they hesitated. Breaking open a jar could release a curse, at least according to local stories. But curiosity won, and when they cracked it open, they didn't find gold or treasure. They found a stack of leather-bound codices wrapped in linen, pages packed with dense Coptic writing that none of them could read. They had no idea that they were holding one of the most important archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. Those codices eventually made their way into the hands of scholars. What they found inside stunned the academic world. The collection included more than 50 separate works. Treatises, dialogues, sayings, cosmologies, and gospels that didn't appear in the New Testament. Among them were texts that would become famous: the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary, and the Gospel of Judas. But the shock wasn't just that these books existed, it was what they said. These writings described a Jesus who taught inner awakening instead of external obedience. They portrayed a universe shaped by layers of spiritual beings worlds and powers far beyond the simple narratives most people knew. They told stories where the material world wasn't the center, but a trap. And they offered a path to salvation, built on self-knowledge, rather than loyalty to an institution. The Nag Hammadi library didn't just add missing pages. It revealed an entire branch of early Christianity that operated outside the later boundaries of orthodoxy. A branch that had its own teachers, its own worldview, and its own understanding of what it meant to follow Jesus. To understand why the Gnostic Gospels were controversial, we have to look at what they actually taught. These texts weren't just alternative versions of familiar stories. They offered a full worldview, a different explanation of God, creation, the soul, and the purpose of Jesus' message. They weren't rewriting Christianity. They were presenting a competing interpretation that made sense to the communities who followed it. And the best way to see that is to break the ideas into two parts. Core Gnostic worldview. What specific texts Thomas, Mary, and Judas actually say. Let's start with the worldview, the core Gnostic ideas. The material world as a prison. Most Gnostic groups believed the material world wasn't created by the true, highest God. Instead, it came from a lower, flawed divine being, a craftsman spirit known as the demiurge. This wasn't a cartoon villain, it was a being that believed it was the only God, unaware of the greater reality above it. The material world from this view wasn't evil, but it was limited. It trapped the soul in layers of ignorance, pain, and distraction. Life wasn't a test, it was a maze. This idea clashed directly with early church theology, which saw creation as good, intentional, and purposeful. The true God and the realm of light. Above the material world was the source of all being, the true God. Not a ruler, not a king, not a judge, but a pure spiritual presence. From this presence emerged a series of divine expressions, or aeons, forming a vast spiritual realm. This was not meant to sound complicated. For Gnostic communities, it simply explained why people felt a separation between their inner sense of the sacred and the world around them. The Sophia myth. Central to the Gnostic story is Sophia, an aeon who reached beyond her place in the spiritual order. Her action led to the creation of the demiurge and, eventually, the material world. To Gnostics, Sophia wasn't a villain. She represented human longing, the desire to understand, the impulse to search, even when the search creates difficulty. Her story mirrored the human condition, a spark of something divine caught in a confusing world. Salvation as inner awakening, gnosis. This is the core difference. For many Christian communities, salvation came through faith, obedience, and participation in the church. For Gnostic groups, salvation meant discovering the truth of your own identity, a quiet realization that the light you seek is already inside you. Jesus, in their view, didn't come to die for sins. He came to wake people up. That single difference created the fault line that eventually separated Gnosticism from orthodoxy. Close readings of key texts. Now let's look at how these ideas show up in the three most well-known Gnostic writings. Each of these texts gives a direct window into how these communities understood Jesus and his message. The Gospel of Thomas. Wisdom through inner light. The Gospel of Thomas is not a story. It contains 114 sayings attributed to Jesus, many of them unfamiliar, some of them similar to the New Testament, but with a different tone. One of the most famous lines is, "The kingdom is inside you and outside you. When you come to know yourselves, you will be known." This is the heart of Thomas. The kingdom isn't a future event, it's a state of recognition. The text doesn't ask you to wait for a savior, it asks you to understand that the truth is already present. Another saying describes Jesus telling his students that when they split wood or lift stone, he is already there. The message is simple. The divine isn't somewhere else, it's in the ordinary moments of life. This approach made Thomas a challenge to emerging church authority. If the kingdom is inside you, who needs an institution to mediate it? The Gospel of Mary, conflict over authority and vision. The Gospel of Mary presents Mary Magdalene as someone who receives private teachings and visions from Jesus. When she shares them, some disciples, especially Peter, question her authority. In the text, Mary describes a vision where the soul rises past hostile spiritual forces. These forces try to pull it back, demanding justification for its existence. But the soul passes through by answering honestly about what it has learned. The message is clear. Salvation is a personal journey of clarity and courage. The conflict with Peter isn't petty drama. It represents two early Christian models, a hierarchical structure based on specific leaders, an inner experiential path open to anyone. Mary's voice represents the second model. The text isn't rewriting history, it's showing a debate that was real in the early movement. And as the institutional church solidified, the first model won. The Gospel of Judas, a reversal of the familiar story. The Gospel of Judas is probably the most misunderstood of all the Nag Hammadi texts. It doesn't portray Judas as a hero. It doesn't ask readers to celebrate his betrayal. Instead, it reframes the relationship between Jesus and Judas as one built on understanding. In the text, Jesus laughs not out of mockery, but because the other disciples misunderstand him. Only Judas grasps that Jesus' message is about freeing the divine spark from the material world. Judas hands Jesus over not out of malice, but because he recognizes that Jesus' death is part of returning his true identity to the realm of light. For many viewers, this idea feels upside down, but for Gnostic groups it made sense. They were less interested in the physical events of the story and more focused on the spiritual meaning beneath them. Why these texts matter in the narrative. These writings didn't just present unusual ideas. They presented a different model of what it means to seek truth. You don't climb to God. You uncover what is already there. You don't wait for a rescue. You remember who you are. And that message, simple, personal, and direct, is exactly why these writings became a problem for the communities that wanted a unified belief system. When you look at the Nag Hammadi codices today, it's easy to forget how unlikely it is that any of them survived. These texts weren't protected in a monastery or copied for centuries by devoted scribes. They made it to us through a combination of chance, secrecy, and the stubbornness of people who believed these teachings were worth preserving, even when the religious landscape was shifting against them. The books themselves were made of leather covers wrapped around bundles of papyrus pages. The writing is in Coptic, the language Egyptian Christians used during the early centuries, but the original versions of many texts were likely written in Greek long before they were copied into the form found in the jar. That means each codex we have is the result of a long chain of transmission, writing, translating, selecting, and finally hiding. Some of the groups connected to these writings, such as the Valentinian communities, placed real value on knowledge and interpretation. They encouraged teaching circles, discussions, and readings that focused on inner meaning. Even as the institutional church grew in influence, these groups continued to produce and share copies of the texts they found meaningful. They didn't see themselves as rebels. They saw themselves as guardians of insight. But over time, the pressure increased. As church leaders worked to define an official canon and standardized doctrine, writings that didn't match the emerging theology were pushed out. Some were destroyed, others were banned, and many simply disappeared because no one was allowed to copy them anymore. The codices at Nag Hammadi survived because someone chose not to burn them. Instead, they were hidden, buried in a jar and sealed away from both danger and discovery. Maybe the person who hid them hoped they would one day be found. Maybe they simply wanted to protect them from being erased. We'll never know. But the fact that these pages made it across more than 1,000 years is proof that even fragile ideas can outlast the forces that try to silence them. To understand why the Gnostic writings vanished, you have to picture the early Christian world not as a single movement, but as a crowded landscape of competing teachers and communities. Everyone was trying to explain who Jesus was, what he taught, and what his message meant. This wasn't a quiet, scholarly disagreement. It was a fight over identity, authority, and the direction the whole movement would take. As Christianity grew, certain leaders wanted stability. They needed shared beliefs, shared practices, and a structure that could support communities across cities and regions. Without that structure, the movement risked splintering. and this is where tension with Gnostic groups became unavoidable. The most direct evidence of this conflict comes from writers like Irenaeus, a bishop in the late 2nd century. In his work, Against Heresies, he criticized a wide range of teachings he saw as dangerous or misleading. Many of the ideas he rejected were exactly the ones found in the Nag Hammadi texts: the belief in hidden knowledge, the idea of a flawed creator, and the claim that some students possessed deeper insight than others. From Irenaeus' perspective, these teachings threatened the unity of the growing church. If people believed salvation came from inner awakening rather than the shared message of the community, then leadership, doctrine, and public teaching could lose their foundation. The church wasn't just defining truth. It was trying to survive in a world where it faced political pressure, social suspicion, and the need to organize. The move to form a clear canon also played a huge role. When church leaders selected which books belonged in the New Testament, they chose texts that supported the structure they were building, narratives that emphasized shared faith, public teaching, and a single path to salvation. Writings that presented Jesus as a guide to private, personal insight didn't fit that direction. It's important to be clear, this wasn't a conspiracy to hide the real Christianity. It was a process of institutional consolidation. In that process, some ideas gained authority and others lost it. The Gnostic texts fell on the losing side. Once bishops held more influence, these writings were discouraged, then banned, and eventually forgotten. Communities that used them faded or were absorbed into the broader church. And without people copying the manuscripts, the text disappeared from circulation. What we now call suppression was a mix of theology, politics, and practicality. The church wasn't just deciding what people should believe. It was deciding what kind of community Christianity would become, and which stories fit that future. When the Nag Hammadi texts were published, they didn't spark a new religious movement, but they did open a door for people who felt disconnected from rigid forms of belief. These writings showed that early Christianity wasn't a straight line. It was a conversation with many voices, including voices that focused on the inner life instead of external rules. And that discovery has shaped modern discussions about spirituality in ways the early farmers who found the jar could never have imagined. In the 20th century, thinkers like Carl Jung turned to Gnostic ideas to explore psychology. He saw the stories of light and shadow, inner struggle and self-knowledge as symbolic descriptions of how the mind works. Others found value in the idea that spiritual growth comes from understanding yourself, not just accepting a doctrine handed down by an institution. Gnostic writings have also influenced modern esoteric groups, alternative Christian communities, and people interested in meditation or inner work. Not because these modern paths are direct descendants of Gnostic communities, they're not, but because the basic themes feel familiar. The idea that truth can be personal and that the search for meaning often begins inside. At the same time, the rediscovery of these texts raises an ethical question. What happens when institutions control which voices survive? The Gnostic Gospels aren't just artifacts. They're reminders of how easy it is for whole perspectives to vanish when power decides which stories matter. Their survival gives us a chance to hear from a part of early Christianity that almost disappeared. And whether or not someone agrees with their message, the simple fact that they exist encourages us to think more openly about the diversity of spiritual experience. When you step back and look at the full story, the discovery in the desert, the forgotten codices, the alternate vision of Jesus, one thing becomes clear. These texts weren't lost because they lacked insight. They were lost because they didn't fit the direction the early church chose as it grew into an institution. And that leads to a simple, honest question worth thinking about after this video ends. When a community decides which voices belong and which ones should fade away, what knowledge disappears with them? Maybe the more important question is this: who keeps those quiet voices alive? And why do they feel responsible for doing so? The Nag Hammadi writings survived because someone believed they mattered. The fact that we can read them today suggests they were right. Thanks for watching Hidden Faith. If this episode helped you see the early Christian world in a new way, consider hitting like. It tells YouTube this kind of content matters. And if you want more stories about lost texts, hidden traditions, and ideas that almost disappeared, subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. I'd also love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Which part of the Gnostic writings surprised you the most? And what topic should we explore next? Your suggestions help shape the direction of this channel. Thanks again for being here, and I'll see you in the next one.